Welcome to the Epik Mellon podcast, conversations with the real humans behind broadband networks, cybersecurity, and the future of communications. Brought to you by QA Cafe.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another cozy, well-audioed episode of the Epik Mellon podcast. I say that because when I did the one last week, or 2 weeks ago, the one that came out last week, I was at Network X. And I have these pretty good microphones, but like with the din and everything, it was hard to do. I need a better Rode setup. So I'm glad to be back in here. I have with me Bob Carrick once again, and I'm glad to have him on again because we need to like catch up. So almost like you're witnessing in real time Bob and I catching up over a bunch of stuff on the show, which is great. As always, Epik Mellon is brought to you by QA Cafe. The views expressed by Bob and myself do not reflect those of QA Cafe or its ownership, nor do they reflect those of Calix or its ownership, just so that we're all safe. And it is obviously brought to you and well funded by the several great products that we make at QA Cafe, including the industry standard test platform for testing broadband gateways, Wi-Fi routers, and other CPE known as CD router. And with thousands of predefined test cases, the ability to test in parallel and really work everything into your CI/CD system so that you're getting everything done cheaper and faster. And as well as CloudCheck, which is going to have a very, very big update coming out today when I'm recording this show, which is the way for enterprises and their cybersecurity teams to work together on network packet captures and keep a record of everything that's going on and be able to search across all of them and use all kind of cool tools presented in a way that's easy for your newbies and your experts to work together. And that is powered now by Packet Viewer, which is the internal guts that you can OEM and put into your own product if you need to give packet capture analysis to your customers in an easy drop-in way with minimal effort and a very easy licensing. All right, so how are you? How's things?
Like you, pretty exhausted, right? I like the fact that you said this is cozy, right? I'm in a gray hoodie that happens to actually be from my employer. We were in Vegas.
Right, wearing the t-shirt.
Exactly, right? We were in Vegas just over a week ago for our annual conference Connections, and we were leading a hike on the Saturday morning. So the conference really officially starts technically on Sunday, and then Monday and Tuesday, but
with
obviously
golf,
folks come in
with a very serious golf session.
That's exactly it. So we added last year a hike for those that didn't want to golf. This year the hike got even bigger, so they needed more Calix folks to make sure they were on the hike to chaperone.
Wow.
And so this was one of the gifts for me, chaperoning that hike.
Nice.
On a Saturday morning after having just gotten in on Friday, after having
right, because it's both golf people and hike people get up at ungodly hours in the morning. So Bob's talking about Calix connections, which I don't know if I told this story last time, but the transformation of Calix over time from when I first interacted with you guys in 2005, I think, when I was a tow-headed grad student, but was kind of amazing because Calix was small originally, and then now they have this massively, ridiculously huge conference for all of investors. And I cannot possibly explain how huge and ridiculous it is, but the size of the screens alone are just...
It's where we're at full capacity at the Win for all of their conference facility at the Win. So this is the first year where we actually had to close registration almost 2 months in advance with staff, with customers, with spouses, because Calix people are...
because everybody brings everybody up. Yeah.
Yep. We were at about 3,000 people.
Dang. That's
very tiring. Very amazing.
I can imagine.
Really awesome. It is, from an industry perspective, it is the best conference. It's, yes, of course, about Calix, but it's about our customers, their stories, their journeys, where they're succeeding, where they're bettering their communities. But it is exhausting.
No, and I appreciate that. Like, that's sort of the niche that you guys are all taking the lead on, right? Because I've talked to a couple other people from like NTCA and stuff like that about the tier 2 and tier 3 world, and how it's not the news you hear, you know? It's not the news you hear, but it's like the most important stuff that's going on, right? Like
these, right? Like, and maybe if, and I'll apologize to your audience in advance. We might repeat stuff that we talked about in June of
oh yeah,
2023.
I'm pretty sure we
This
did.
one,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
when I came into Calix almost 8 years ago, I didn't realize that there were, more than 1,600 service providers in this country, basically. I thought there were 11 and they started with A, V, or C, right?
Yeah.
Turns out that's not the case at all. The ones, yes, of course, in the major NFL cities, for lack of a better term, those are the dominant players. But if you go outside of that, where really the majority of people live, it's this whole other space of these regional, whether they be cooperatives or just small independent, for lack of a better term, mom and pop shops that are doing great things in their community and really bringing services to the community that the big folks are ignoring, right? Because,
Right.
if it's costing you $12,000 per home passed, where's the return for them? Well, the return for these
Right.
smaller ones is what they're bringing to their community and what they're doing for their community. And you can see all throughout the United States, these small communities really thriving and bringing new businesses in because they've got, an all fiber network that's doing amazing things. So it was a big eye-opening experience, but it's pretty fulfilling when you stop and think about it.
Yeah, no, and it's a worlds of different experience from. So I was at Network X, right? I know we were both in Paris for conferences, of which you had to suddenly fly back and then go to Vegas. So I don't envy you at all. I only did that one time, and it was to go to Connections after Network X,
Right, exactly.
and I was like, I'm not doing that again. No, uh, but it's very different. Not that the rest of the world is different, but it was a very different experience at Network X, but not entirely, right? Because there's a lot of smaller operators out there in the rest of the world too. And it was pretty busy. I had actually had a really good time there. It was like I think it's the most busy I've ever been at Network X. Like I was joking that like I didn't stop talking for like 48 hours straight.
Yeah, no, I was following you since we did happen to come, we happened to see each other, which was great, even though it was sort of like ships passing in the night. But,
Yeah.
I suspect you'll see a presence from Calix next year. We've been following Network X for a few years, and I've continued to push internally to say, I'm starting to think this is an event that we should play in. Calix, obviously very dominant in North America. We're dipping our toes in Europe right now. The aspect for me in cloud is that every country in Europe has different PII laws, right? For privacy laws.
Oh, yeah.
For data. And so there are certain countries that are easier to get into, even though like
Yeah.
the UK, for example, has pretty strict laws, but we're compliant with those, right? If you look at Germany, very different laws, very, very hard to get into, especially you have to host locally in Germany, which that becomes, a cost issue when you think about it. So we've been
Oh, wow.
dipping
I didn't know that.
toes. Yeah. And every country is different. So we've been dipping our toes in Europe and really had some success in the UK market from a fiber perspective. You can look at a lot of the independents there, our Calix networks. And so
cool.
Following Network X, and I think next year we probably have to, we showed up there, but not from a booth perspective. So we had people there, but
Right.
Not showing. So I think next year, based on the things I've heard from you and from others that were there, it's probably time to go
Well,
hang out.
no, and I even said the same thing because I'll be totally honest, right? Like I hate trade shows from the perspective of like having a booth and setting up there because it's just a nightmare. It's just a nightmare, right? And it has nothing to do with the concept and it has nothing to do with like the show. It's not even the show organizers, right? It's usually the venue, right? And their staff that you have to deal with. But like, so I show up there and what I like to do is have a speaking opportunity, right? So I'm able to do that through Broadband Forum and a couple other people very often, right? And that lets me go there and at least participate without having to go through that insane rigmarole, which I don't wish on anyone. But now I feel like we kind of have to.
Right. No, and I'm fortunate, right, that I being Calix has a team that does all of that part for me and for us.
I don't have that.
Yeah, no, right. You're in marketing, and I'm on the other side of the house, right? So, very fortunate from that perspective. But like you, right, I do like to, if I'm going to make the investment of going to a show, I only do outside of Connections, I only do about 3 or 4 shows a year. Though Calix, like you could see Calix basically across the North America, if not the United States, almost every other week, because there's all these regional independent shows. I do.
Oh yeah, so many. Right. I was on with Patrick Moreno from Zeisel, and because I follow him on LinkedIn, and I don't think he's ever at home.
It depends your role in an organization, right? So because Calix has a sales force of I think over 300 people now, and that's just on the sales team. So luckily, they only pull me into I'll air quote the big shows where they need the big guns, for lack of a better term, to come in. But then that's also because, right, I'm doing like triple duty, right? I might be speaking, I might be doing some executive meetings, and then obviously I'll cover, Cloud at the booth. But the trade show thing, it can be a grind.
Right. No, and I talked about this last time. Like I thought that after COVID, we would have sort of an emperor's new clothes moment where everybody was like, "Oh, wait, we don't have to do trade shows." But that's not what happened at all.
Oh,
now people want more of them.
I've noticed, like, if you look at like Fiber Connect as an example of one of the big ones in the US, especially for the regionals, it's just bigger and bigger every year. It's just huge.
Yeah. So it is exhausting. No. So did you at Connections? Did you speak on anything this time?
I did. So I wanted to, I've said it to my marketing team, and by mine I mean obviously my employer, the marketing team, multiple times, that I thank them for only giving me 3 speaking sessions. Right? I know we talked last time about the speaking session that I had in 2021.
Oh, because you had just been on, yeah.
It was on main stage with only like 16 hours notice, right? And main stage, back then, because it was 2021, so it was just after, we were still sort of in the midst of COVID. And so it was about 1,400 people, right? Which is a little different. Yeah, I can do like 200, no problem. 1,400 is a whole other thing. But this year, I didn't have to do main stage. I just did some three what we call mini mains, where we do these tracks that are very role based. Right. So you might be, if you're in the operations team, these are maybe the topics that you want to focus in on. So I did 3 that were very similar, but really trying to, and you and I've talked about this before, right? For years, we've been guiding, say, the support organization at a service provider on, hey, how do I get you from point A to point B to understand that this is a coverage problem and they need, a mesh unit. Well, that's always been like a line of questioning where you're guiding them from first question to last question, getting to the answer. Why not be proactive? Why are we waiting for customers to call when we can use all of the data and the insights, obviously powered up in the cloud, to say, hey, proactively, this subscriber's got an ONT that's just dying. Look at how bad their download speeds are. Why don't we proactively go out and get it fixed versus letting them suffer in silence? Because not every subscriber calls, right? I'll use my own example. And this is a story we haven't talked about because it happened recently. So I moved to this place that you see behind me in March with my wife and my dogs, and had to leave a great symmetrical fiber-based connection for a DOCSIS-based connection, which is fine, right? I can still get a gig down, and 36 meg up is enough to do things like this. So get the service, terrible. I'm, getting jitter on Zoom conferences. The set-top boxes aren't set-top boxes anymore. They're all over the top, all app-based on the television. It's buffering and jitter, just like. So finally, I get to this point 2 weeks into being here that I'm just so frustrated. I'm finally calling. And I hated to do it, but I had to pull by the way, I'm in this industry. I used to work in the cable industry specifically.
Yeah.
Please don't ask me to do all the things that I already did. And luckily, I got a great support person that right out of the gate was like, hey, actually, we can't even have this conversation. Your signal levels are so bad and so all over the place that I need to send a technician. So the irony is I got a good support session, but they already knew. They had all of the data. That person knew instantly that they needed a technician to the house. So why didn't they just call me proactively to say, hey.
No, right. By the way, you're having problems. We'll come fix it.
I am.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that's really been the focus of how do we shift the mindset of the industry, at least from my side of it, right, which is the support and operations side of the house. How do we go from being reactive to proactive?
No, it's totally true. And it's funny about talking about the privacy thing in Europe. Um, the that sort of mindset is on the table for a lot of people. But like if you go to Broadband Forum's YouTube channel, um, Volker from DT was presenting about how they were using TR369. And they're using it for, because there's a bunch of different deployment models, right? So you can either try to do two things at the same time and do TR69 for old stuff. And, but what they decided to do was like, all right, we're going to use USP for Wi-Fi management, and we're going to do it on these new things that we're deploying out here, right? I don't remember if it was just new software that they're deploying, but the point is that in order for them to do that, which had some proactive access to it, they only were doing it with customers that opted into that because
Right.
of all the German privacy issues, right?
No, and that's exactly it, right? There's, you know, if you look at all of the telemetry we can get from the home, I know how many people have iPhones in that home, right? As an example, it can be, scary if it's used in the wrong way. And so certain countries have taken these much tighter stances on what they consider to be PII, right?
Right.
And, in the US, basically, it's anything that's related to you as a person and it's layers, right?
Right.
And then, but your IP address technically is fine, right? As long as you can't tie it back to other things. So, if you
For those
know,
at home, PII is personally identifiable information.
yes, right, a podcast full of acronyms that we may or may not give definitions to.
I have a very broad audience, right? It's like my family,
right,
and then
right. So for your family, we probably do need to give definition of acronyms. So yeah, it's because of this vast amount of data, how it's used is the critical part to not impacting privacy and security and all of those fun things. So, but nonetheless, right, if I have all of this data, why do I have to wait for a subscriber to call versus why can't I use it proactively to say, hey,
right,
and
right.
We're seeing the shift, right? Especially, we talk about these regionals are doing great things for their communities. They want to be proactive. They want to make sure that their communities are having great experiences because it's not about speed for customers and subscribers. They don't know what speed is. I tell this joke, and it's honestly a true one. If you surveyed 100 people, how many would know that 1 gigabit is faster than 500 megabits? We'd be shocked at the answer because 500 is bigger than 1.
Is it like the anecdote about the failure of the 1/3 pound burger because people thought it was smaller than a quarter pounder?
Right? Because 4 is bigger than 3.
Right.
And people just don't know. And I've been, like, as evident by the gray in my beard, been doing this for well over 25 years. And there was a time where speed did matter, right? Mm-hmm. You would look at, hey, do I want a DSL service that's, 26 megabits per second or whatever the number might be versus a DOCSIS connection that's, shared at the CMTS back then and would get congested back then when everyone got online at 6 o'clock. So we did take that time to do the research. And now people just think it's Wi-Fi, right? When we know very different that, yes, Wi-Fi is the way that most people connect to broadband services, but it is not the broadband service itself.
Right. Yeah. And nobody knows that. Like,
no, that's the thing, right? Like, because I'm in the industry, my colleagues are always wonder why I have everything connected via Wi-Fi in my home. My televisions are Wi-Fi, they're not Ethernet. Everything is Wi-Fi.
They're like, don't you know it sucks?
Correct. I said, but I have to make sure that our stuff performs like it would for 90.
You said this before. That's right. Right? Like, just making sure that you are the live test case to
that I'm the regular subscriber, right? As opposed to the opposite from that perspective. So, because if you look at one of my, above me from a totem pole perspective in reference to senior leadership inside the company, he's got a full switch and a rack in his apartment, or like he lives in Toronto,
right,
in their townhome or whatever in Toronto. And I'm like, that's not reality.
It's not at all, right? It's like the 0.01%. And what's funny about that percentage of people is that it is increasingly, for all the same reasons, the same number of people that would ever consider buying their own router, right? And having to deal with that.
And yeah, we look at like, if we look at, we'll get our customers to ask us for features that go in our mobile management of the Wi-Fi, right? The app for Wi-Fi management. And sometimes you look and be like, that feature is because you're super technical.
Right.
You're going to have
right.
The customers that are using the app every day aren't ever going to need to do that. And the 1% that do are just going to log into the local UI of the router directly and go do it there. Right?
Yeah,
They're not going to be
right.
getting the back end of one of my dogs in the shot.
He's welcome to come on too, man.
Well, the good thing is one, he can't talk and he doesn't have opposable thumbs, so he can't really do things on the internet. That's why I always joke.
For now.
That's true. Who's to say? But, looking at all of these, we have network security that we drop in as containers into our Wi-Fi routers. And I look at, like on stage at Connections, we had one customer that flashed on the huge monitor, to your perspective, I think it's 40 feet wide or some crazy thing, that they had, in the last 30 days had blocked like 1 million threats from going into their subscribers' homes, right? Viruses and Trojans and DDoS and all of that stuff. And I was like, I can't tell you the last time that because I use obviously my employer's systems. I can't tell you the last time that I had to block a threat. And it's the majority of the reason why is I'm a responsible user of broadband services because of my position. And I don't have children, right? So they're not on, their games are one of the worst sources for malware and Trojan.
No, it really is. And I realize that like Roblox has improved over time, but for our teenager, when she was younger, I was like, we're never getting Roblox in this house. And she was really mad about it, right? And then years later, I understand they've got better. And then our 4-year-old just asked me the other day, and I was like, sorry, I can't turn around on this now.
Well, that's true. And that's how, the younger one always gets it more lax because you've dealt with it before and you're like, I'm just broken down now. I have to say yes. Yeah.
No, I was holding it firm. I'm like, I reserve 5 grudges ever. And that's...
Yeah, that's the one. You're like, that's it. It's like, I thought for years that I would never watch the movie Titanic because I know how it ends. And then finally, 15 years later or whatever, I finally watched it. And guess what? It ended exactly how I thought it would. So.
I was just like, my wife will never watch Breaking Bad because she's from Albuquerque, where they filmed most of it, and I guess a lot of the crew were real jerks to the people in the service industry there.
Well, and that's right. We get these personal beefs, right, for whatever reason, and yes, they certainly can be, based on where you live.
Let's talk. I want to talk about the app thing though, because if you're dropping a security app on there, what's cool, and I talked to Josh from the NTCA about this, was how the tier 2s and tier 3s are now understanding that they can be seen as the people who provide that kind of technology, and it's all being done through the gateway, which is cool, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's and now we're seeing standards around that, right? Like, we talk about LCM as an example, right? So making sure that the industry is adopting a common methodology for dropping containers into residential gateways, and then how can those be managed, say, with one of our favorite topics, 369, right, from the Broadband Forum, and dropping these containers in and putting the intelligence inside the gateway is the right decision, right? There was, if you rewind, say, 10 or 12 years ago, there was this whole, and I'm sure you're aware of virtual CPE, right? When we were trying to, as an industry, go down that path, take the intelligence out of the gateway, make it very inexpensive and cheap, right? Just doing Wi-Fi, and then take all of the routing and intelligence and move it back into the network. It didn't scale. And also, those decisions need to be very real time, right? When we first started looking at dropping, security and parental controls as containers into the gateway, into the router, a lot of it was done as cloud intelligence. And we were noticing that you'd go to start a browser session as an example, and even though it was maybe 7 additional milliseconds, your brain can pick that up. Your brain's like, wait, why doesn't this seem speedy? And so, re-architect, put all of the intelligence directly into the residential gateway because all of these decisions need to be made extremely quickly. Obviously, because they're containers, they can be updated very regularly without service impacting to the residential gateway. There's always going to be a time when you're like, hey, I haven't seen this thing before, right? So you go and check with the cloud to see if there's updates. But the technology, and to your point, these little internet service providers can be the Comcast, right? Comcast has been doing a ton of what we do at Calix for the regional players. They've been doing it for years. They continue to buy up companies, right? Incorporate those things into their gateways, and off they go. But they've got billions of dollars that they can spend. And so for us to be able to bring that same and sometimes even more forward thinking, because we can pivot faster than, say, a Comcast, has been great. I was at the same Connections conference last week, and we were sitting doing a small ideation session. So it was one of our partner companies and joint customers, about 12 different joint customers inside the room. And two of them near the end said, we really appreciate that you make us look like industry giants to our communities. We're just tiny little, but with your innovations, your technology, your partnership, we look like industry giants. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, right. And some of it is even just the polish, right? Because and I've mentioned this before, but one of the things I always appreciate that you guys do is sort of you also do sort of the packaging and the marketing side for them, right?
We do. We offer them just tens of thousands of pieces of content, and all of that is just an included service, right? Like the Jerry D videos, right? That's something that we invest in heavily as an example. And we've built out online tools where they can just rebrand, slap their logo in, slap their colors. And then now they've got this content, whether it be a web page or a YouTube video or a piece of printed collateral. We drop all of that stuff. It's pretty awesome from that perspective.
That's cool. And interestingly enough, because you guys have been doing it for a pretty long time, but now because the gateways are becoming standardized, I'm noticing that most of the I don't want to say many, I want to say most of the other vendors out there that are not the Chinese companies that are sort of trying to compete on price, right, are becoming software companies, right? As the gateways become more standardized, all of them now have to do like what you guys have been doing for a while. But
I don't mind the confirmation by seeing those companies having to pivot and follow along. I appreciate that, our founder, now our chairman, Carl Russo, had this vision and saw it long before the industry did. And yeah, it was a fight, right? And change is scary. And we have to, in some cases, we're dragging our customers sort of kicking and screaming to say, hey, wait, you really do have to change, because folks are, right, the big players are coming, right? T-Mobile's doing a whole bunch of acquisitions because they realize their 5G powered internet's not very good. And so they realize that there's money in this space. And so they're buying up fiber-based service providers to go and do a big overhaul and come into this space. So we predict that, over the next, say, 10 years, basically everyone's going to have two high-speed provider options. And hence speed isn't going to be the differentiator.
Meanwhile, outside the US, people are like, only two?
Right. Well, and the interesting thing, outside the US, right, it's all riding on the same backbone, right? It's the same, right. We'll use Canada as the example, right? Bell and Rogers in Ontario, they build it and they're forced by the government to wholesale it. In Europe, it's very much wholesale, but you do have independent companies coming in and building fiber networks, and then of course, forced to wholesale.
And it ebbs and flows. Like you talked about the UK stuff, and I had Brisk on, and they were relatively new, but have been growing really fast. And it's like, how it's like things break up and then they sort of reconsolidate, right? And so that's happening, but that happens all the time.
Yes, and we're seeing that in the UK for sure, right? There were multiple players, and now through attrition and acquisition, and then we'll fast forward 15 years later and they'll be forced to break up again because they got too big in monopoly.
The pendulum.
Yep.
So I wonder if that pendulum will happen with the gateway. I don't know. Because the thing is, like, I've said this 1,000 times, is that broadband internet service is a consumer product, and it was a consumer product first. So everybody experiences it from the perspective of like, not a utility, but kind of in the sense that like you buy your own faucet, you know, and somebody else installs it for you, right? And the water just shows up. But that's how it was with broadband for the longest time, right? Because originally, the internet was dial-up, and phone companies had nothing to do with it. They had nothing to do with it at all. Um, but I'm very curious and encouraged. I really want to see this day where, because of the standardization of the gateway and because of the app functionality that's being there, that these things will now become a new type of appliance that people are much more acutely aware of. And it's not just this thing with a bunch of antennas that sits on a shelf over there, right?
That's what we
That's
hope.
actually responsible for my entire like experience, and that people are really sort of now see it that way, right? Where I think Vodafone was starting to call it a service hub or something like that, where it's like it really is this thing that is responsible for your entire connectivity experience, which is now your entire experience of the world, right?
Right. And it's now becoming, right, it's becoming a part of how you stay safe inside your home from a network perspective, right? It's the lock on your front door, right?
Yeah,
It's what's
right.
keeping your children protected and safe, right, from things online that you hope they don't get exposed to, and you can prevent them from being exposed to while they're at home. It's how you're keeping your home safe from a camera perspective, and making sure your packages aren't getting pirated off the porch, right? It's all of these different experiences. It's how your children are learning and being educated at times if they're being schooled from home. It's how a lot of us make our living from a work perspective. It's everything around our lives. And so if you're driving these great experiences, as opposed to just saying, hey, I'm giving you Wi-Fi connectivity, you actually can really become an essential part. To your point, it's
right. And that's crazy that it puts the provider in that perspective, you know, not just from the opportunities, but also, just as a quick side note, the privacy thing, right? Where it's like, you know what, hackers are going to get my shit anyway, so maybe it's okay if I trust my operator to have it ahead of time so that it doesn't happen, you know.
no, that's exactly, it's important.
Right. But like, it's the I wanted to talk about Matter for a second, because what the way that has all started, right, is like the big IoT players coming together, right, from the Zigbee side of things and all that. Very cool. It is a solid, it's a solid protocol, like almost too solid, right? Um, but you know, so they built that, but they built it from the perspective of the smart home network, right? Like this. And the players who were trying to interact with, who are trying to monetize it, right? And the people who have been funding it, right? The big guys, um, they still have the perspective that whatever happens, their ecosystem is going to be the one that they are the experience providers, right? You get the Samsung app. Samsung is your experience provider for all of the things, even if they're not Samsung devices, right? Because that's what Matter does. But I I really do believe that, because of gateway standardization and containerization and the power behind them, that because they become this hub of the user's connected experience, and IoT is a connected experience, that it really is the best place to do that.
It is, and we're seeing that start to happen, right? You and I talked briefly offline about, trying to bring that standardization, say, into the 369 part of the world, and it really is, right, that set of antennas, which is so much more than that. But I'll use an example that's directly related to the internet service provider space. Why did Amazon buy Eero? Not because they wanted a Wi-Fi company, right? But in the sense that, yes, they did want a Wi-Fi company because they want all of their data. That data is, for them, more powerful than any cookie that they can have on a browser, right? And so, if you're using it for good and providing those great experiences to, the consumers and your community. And so, yeah, taking Matter and bringing that in, because Matter's nothing if you don't have good connectivity at home.
Right. And not just connectivity, but everything else, right? So it's like, because the service hub is a security a security hub too, and it's like
Yep.
all of those things are going to. Oh, I won't say it. I only have 3 matter puns ever, and I think I'm down to 2. But everything matters.
No, I was going to say when you said matter, because matter matters, right?
Yeah. Which is funny because I think they named it. They wanted to name it based on the idea that, the conceptual idea that with IPv6, every molecule in the universe can have an IP address, right? So everything could hypothetically be an IoT device. But then people use it, to mean matter and mattering, which I think is also great for them. But
I love that your audience, if they watch this, is going to see one of my dogs just going crazy in the corner.
yeah, I like that the camera is like, oh, is that dog talking? I'm gonna go.
Yeah, my camera likes to capture when it because the way that this camera works is it's eyeballs.
Oh, okay.
And one of my dogs has a bit of an ear infection right now, so he's just going a little crazy because his ear's bothering him. So I know after this, I've got to make sure I go wash his ear.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I really hope that happens, right? And I hope that happens from like you said, you're trying to be the typical consumer. I do that too, right? I don't have time. I do not have time to do any DIY stuff with my network. I don't.
No, I've got some Samsung televisions, so I'm very aware of the Samsung proprietary app, but luckily it can connect to, I'm not going to say her name because that shall come on, but can connect to the Amazon appliances so that I can just control that way from a singular place, as opposed to having to have all this bespoke stuff. So if we can get Matter into a broadband gateway and get that controller aspect standardized with things like 369, then you've now got this centralized hub for everything that is your experience inside the home and now outside the home, right? It's no secret that people want great connectivity in their backyard or their pool or their tea shed or man cave, all of these different things that are now outside of your traditional 4 walls of your home, and bringing those same experiences, and extends to people want those same experiences in the cafe or the brewery, right? They're connecting on.
Yeah. Well, and I also think of this from to talk about why we never went the way of dumb white box gateways is because I don't think that the fundamental concept, and it's not just like a mental construct, it's also literally the network boundary. But the fact that that hub, that router is the boundary between your stuff and everybody else's stuff, means that you want to have that experience, even if you're trying to use smart home stuff and look at your camera remotely. You know what I mean? Like it's still your stuff.
No, that's exactly it. So, it's extending across, right? You look at, community Wi-Fi, and now we've got service providers that are joining forces so that if you're going from, say, I only provide service in one part of the state, I'm going to partner with the provider in the other half of the state. We're going to share our community outdoor Wi-Fi network so that my subscribers, when they go visit your community, can get the great, same, safe, secure wireless access, from a Wi-Fi perspective, because these same places that they're doing all these great things from a broadband perspective are also not being treated well by the cellular companies. So they don't have even cellular service in a lot of these cases.
Oh no, it's so bad. It's so bad. My wife just got a commercial kitchen for her catering company, and it's in Rye, New Hampshire, and there's nothing.
Yep.
There is no mobile connectivity there. Like it's there, but like inside the building, it's terrible. So like there would have been, if it was any better, she wouldn't have had to get a broadband connection to that office, right? Because whatever, for the amount of times that she's going to be on the internet while she's there, she could use a hotspot or whatever. But it's not, and so we have our local fiber company, Fidium, coming out because it's the only thing we can do, because it's just not there. And I don't think people realize just how many dead spots there are in the country when it comes to mobile.
Right. Being someone that travels to many of these spots, I get to witness it firsthand, but it's really crazy that exists, but it's also great that there are now options, right? These local service providers are now there, instead of doing MVNO services, because again, that wouldn't really work anyway. If there's no cellular coverage there, how are you going to be an MVNO? And that's another acronym that we can we'll put in the show
Does
notes.
that? What does that stand for?
Mobile virtual network operator, I believe.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you can't do that because the coverage doesn't exist, so why wouldn't you then say, hey, you know what? I've got hardened outdoor units. I can attach them to the network, blast Wi-Fi out, and now we've got voice over Wi-Fi as your connectivity from your mobile device, and you've got it all over the town square. And so especially, again, these towns are trying to revitalize in many scenarios. And so if they're being able to offer these great services, like I said, earlier, new businesses, they're thriving. People are moving to these communities, right? Not to talk about COVID for a second time, but a lot of people moved out of big cities because they wanted to get out into the world and into the countries. And
it's no longer about parking and walkability. It's about where do you have good internet service?
Great connectivity. That's the one of the, I live in New York City. You'd think that I would have multiple broadband choices in the building that I live in, and I don't, right?
No.
I do have great mobile coverage, right? I have 5G everywhere, right? But I don't.
Yeah, that happened at the Airbnb we stayed at. It was really bad.
Yeah. That's the unfortunate part. So yes, even the big cities have to struggle along too. But for us here, it's a cost perspective, right? For Verizon, as an example, to dig up my street and go lay fiber because they go underground, not aerial. That cost is prohibitive depending on what's the...
Oh, it'd be astronomical, right? The number of people you would have to get to agree.
They did it on 14th Street. They did it on 13th Street.
Oh, really?
16th Street. They didn't do it on 15th Street where I live.
Interesting.
Because the street wasn't dense enough.
Right. Huh.
About 2/3 of the block is a big YMCA, as opposed to being a whole bunch of residential consumers.
Oh, yeah.
That's an economics decision, right? And that goes back to, in sort of a bookend, on that's why these regionals are doing what the big providers aren't, because they're invested in the community and they realize that, it's going to cost me more to pass each home, but it's about community, not necessarily just economics.
Right. In some cases, quite literally, it's like your neighbor is your ISP, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it, right? They live in these communities, right?
Yeah.
They're a part of them. They see, they're getting tech support questions at the grocery store.
Right. For all of you out there who get tired of fielding your family's technology questions, imagine that writ large.
I'll tell one story on that, right? So imagine I get tech support questions all the time, right? I get tech support questions from my colleagues. So it's a Saturday morning. This is 2 weeks ago. And I get a text message. It's our CEO. It's Michael Weenan. Get a text message. He's like, do you have a minute? I said, sure. He said, I got our new Wi-Fi 7 system. The product leadership team sent him a whole bunch of, mesh units and new systems because he just bought a new home. And he's like, I'm having trouble with it. So I became his tech support person for the next hour and a half, helping him set up his Wi-Fi network. So it's all ranges, right? When I worked for Comcast, when I lived in Philly, I would never tell anybody that I worked for Comcast. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't deal with it. So
no, I feel bad too, because even our customers, right? So we're trying to get this fiber service to my wife's business. And I'm like, I do know the guy who tests all their CPE, but I don't think he's going to have any influence.
No, that's exactly it, right? We've been doing this for such a long time. And that's why, right, when I called my service provider when I was having a problem, I literally said it on the phone. I'm going to be that guy for a minute. So I apologize, but I've been doing this a long time.
I always feel bad too. I really do. Because I understand that they have a script that they have to get through, right? That's part of their job, right?
Yep. Very literally.
For good reasons, because there's some steps that, if the average person skipped them, then you might miss something. Right. So it's not just there.
Bill Gates taught us one thing: a reboot solves all problems.
Yep.
Right.
Hey, and some people design that way. Mm-hmm.
We called it a 3-finger salute back then, right?
Yeah.
For those that don't know what Jason and I are talking about, Control-Alt-Delete, right? Which would reboot your Windows system if it was blue screened, and that would magically fix the problem until the next time it happened.
All right, dude. You have some important stuff that came up you got to get to right now. Yeah.
I do. I have another meeting coming up. Plus, I got to see what the heck my dog's been doing because he's been throwing all the cushions off the couch, as you can see behind me.
Oh, that sucks. It must be so frustrating being an animal and like you can't say what's happening to you and you usually can't actually do anything about it.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part, right? You just wish, especially when they're sick, right? You just wish they had a voice and they could, they could talk. Especially like the lighter colored one that you can see just by my shoulder. He's probably 12 or 13 now, so he's getting to be an old boy. And my other one is he's very troubled. We actually just started him on Prozac. We've had him for 2 years. We've gone through very intense training, but he was found tied to a bench in Bedford-Stuyvesant. He had bites and burns on him. He was very sick. He has a chronic staph infection. So we're now at this case where he needs a little bit of medication to help calm him down. And you just wish that he could talk and express his feelings, because the only way a dog can do it is with their mouth, and their mouth is teeth, right? And he's a 70-pound pit bull, right? So it gets a little edgy, right? The pillows might, get the brunt of it, or my sock, right? Like, who's to say? So.
All right, dude. Thank you very much. As always, everybody, if you want to hear more of Bob and I talk, probably maybe more than once a year, please do hit that subscribe button and or on your favorite podcast channel. And above all, do own the nerdy things that you love and have fun doing them. Thank you, sir. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.